Hello, welcome to another episode of the Short Story Workshop. My name is Matt Bowles. I am joined by Melody Bowles and Simone King. This week we're going to be reading The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, followed by a discussion. So, I'm sure many people have read this story before. It's very famous, probably one of the most famous short stories. But amongst Edgar Allan Poe's work, I think it's one that holds up. Maybe the best, to be honest, from what I've read. I think partly because of the really strong character voice. You know, he's a prolific writer. He's very important. So yeah, even if you've heard it before, you know, we might have some interesting things to say about it and about Edgar Allan Poe himself. So let's get started. Here is The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? Disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was a sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far as I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight, but I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber, and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed, to suspect that every night just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph, to think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was the low stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it had welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it, you cannot imagine how stealthily, until, at length, a simple dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones, but I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me how well I have told you that I am nervous? So I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbour. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot, whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all, ha! When I had made an end of these labours, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbour during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers that is, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long I found myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until at last I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently, and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. Okay, so let's get the obvious thing out of the way. Just so I know, are we all in agreement that on both occasions, when the narrator hears the beating of a heart, he is in fact listening to his own heart?
Yeah.
Nah, I think it's actually the dead man's heart beneath the floorboards. I'm kidding, I'm in agreement.
Okay, you got me. I was not sure.
Same, I was like, what have I missed?
Clearly, it's the old man's heart. Like, he's perfectly sane. If he says it's the old man's heart, it's the old man's heart.
You're right.
That is the logic that my class of 13-year-old English students came to, I remember correctly.
Were you also 13 at the time?
Yeah, I did this in English, and we read this story, and I was like, this story is really cool. And they were like, I don't get it. And I felt a bit annoyed with most of the class. They didn't seem to understand. I was like, well, clearly the heart wasn't, it was his own heart he was hearing. Dead people's hearts don't beat. And then they're like, but he said it was the dead man's heart. And I said, yeah, but he's crazy. And then they said, no, but he said he was sane. And I'm like, oh.
Logical thinking in education at its height.
Anyway, what did you two think of this story? I'm a big fan.
I like this story a lot, even though it tells me basically nothing, because I can't trust anything the narrator says. Claims not to be crazy and then goes into a detailed account of how he killed a man for looking at him funny, or her funny. I don't even know if the narrator's a boy or a girl.
I think it's a man.
It must be a man.
Yeah, I was like, it really tells you nothing about the person telling the story. It doesn't even tell you how they know the old man, or why it's not, like when the police go around, they don't say, why are you in the house, you know? Why are you here? They seem to accept the narrator being there like it's a normal thing, which makes me think, okay, well, that's weird. Is he a relation or a friend? Does he work for the old man, or?
I think it's that he lives there normally. Good thing is he has the other bedroom. Like, I assume he doesn't just sneak in the middle of the night, though he could. Like, I assume it's either a relation or an employee.
Sorry, yeah, I got the impression he was sneaking into someone's house. But it doesn't make sense now that I think about it.
Yeah, we could be the old man's lodger. Something like that.
Yeah, that makes way more sense. So, yeah, I really liked the story, even though I know nothing, and I still don't know if anything in it is true. Maybe he's just making this up. I think it's great that it tells a story without telling us anything about any of the characters, really.
And that we come to such strong conclusions about them despite that.
I mean, it's not that it doesn't say anything, it's that we can't trust what it says. Those are very different things.
It's good because you can therefore interpret it however you want.
I really am just picturing the guy at the end of Psycho. I think it's the gender ambiguity. I'm just really picturing that kind of confession scene.
Hitchcock, big Edgar Allan Poe fan.
Yeah, I can believe that.
It's true. What did you think of the story, Simone?
I liked it. I like the sense that he was trying to justify their innocence throughout the whole thing. There was something quite frantic about the way it was written and how the sentences stumbled into each other, which I appreciated.
Does he use a lot of exclamation marks for someone who's perfectly calm?
In all fairness, calm is not the same as sane.
He does say he's nervous. He doesn't claim not to be nervous.
Well, that's clearly a sign of sanity. Only someone who is actually insane would be that calm after committing a murder.
Who do we think the narrator is speaking to?
I get the impression that he's telling his story to like a judge or something, is the impression I got.
I mean, he seems so determined to assert that he's not mad. So you can only assume that whoever's talking to him has just said that he definitely is mad.
Or it's a psychiatrist or a doctor, and they want to
Yeah.
do like a insanity plea for him.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe a doctor. Or
a lawyer.
Yeah, somebody who's trying to get him sent off to an insane asylum.
What do we think of the title?
It's really clever.
It's good, isn't it?
I like the implication that the heart is snitching on him.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't think of that. That's cool.
It is weird how he argues with his own physiology.
Don't we all?
Maybe it's weirdly relatable.
I mean, I feel like that's how I'd react after committing a murder.
I think I liked how it's weirdly contradictory. He says that he's sane, and then he shows you that he's definitely not. And some of the things he says don't make sense at all. Like, he likes this guy. He's done nothing bad to him. The old man has done everything to earn his respect, but his eye is evil, and therefore he must die.
Yeah, it's pretty strange.
And there's even more the closer you look. Like, he's so proud of the fact that he slowly puts his head through the door, and it takes him like an hour. And then later on, he tells you that it's completely pitch black. So, what was the point?
So he didn't wake him up with a sound.
Moving your head doesn't make a sound.
Yeah, it does. It's like the kind of whistle through the air.
Nah.
Sudden movement causes your body weight to shift or something.
I'm now moving my head to see if it makes a sound.
Me too. It's just unnecessary to take that long. Anyway, he contradicts himself a lot.
He's unreliable. You can't trust anything he says. Did he even kill the man? Maybe he's just...
What they don't show you is that they pull up the floorboards and there's nothing there.
That would have been so good.
I don't know.
I feel like I would rather not know if he killed the man or not. Like, it's better that we don't have proof either way of his madness. We can suspect it, but we can't know for sure.
I think everything happened as he said.
Yeah, probably. It's just speculation because the story's so open. You can really go wild with the way you interpret it, which is one of my favourite things about it.
What do we feel about the fact that he heard the beating of the heart before he killed the old man as well as after? Because there's a suggestion that he hears the heart as a sign of his guilt for the murder, but if he hears it beforehand as well, it suggests it can't just be that.
Well, it's because he's getting excited about the fact he's about to commit murder. And the old man's eye is creeping him out, so it makes his heart beat faster, which is what kills him, right?
I guess, yeah.
Because it makes it kind of interesting in that if he wasn't so afraid of the eye, none of this would have happened in the first place. But also, in that moment, he wouldn't have been able to kill him.
Have you never had it that you quite like a person, but there's something about them that would not necessarily cause you to commit murder, but you just have an irrational thing about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like that about one of my university tutors. I hated him.
Yeah. Like, we act like that's the sign of his madness, but that's actually one of the most relatable things about it.
It's true, and that's one of the reasons the story is so good, because even the crazy parts are weirdly relatable. Like, we can understand why this one thing might unsettle him a little bit, and then why he might overreact to his own reactions.
Yeah. I mean, also the old guy might be about to catch him lurking in his room like a creep. I mean, that's the one night he actually did it, isn't it? Like, when the old man woke up.
Do you think if the old man hadn't woken up, he wouldn't have killed him because he wouldn't have seen the eye?
He wouldn't have seen the eye, and he would always have the option of not doing it and coming back another night. well, once the eye is open, he's been seen, he's been caught in the act, essentially, so he can't just pretend it didn't happen. And what's he going to do? Stand there until dawn?
I'm just thinking whether I'd rather murder someone or explain why I'm creeping about in their room.
Murder's definitely the less awkward one.
I mean, it's the speckled band all over again. You might not get him on the first night, but sooner or later it's going to go down.
Yes.
So I'm like, the story is good. I question everything, and then yeah, it's a good example. It's definitely a good example of an unreliable narrator. I was trying to think of other examples of unreliable narrators to compare to. I guess the most modern one I can think of is Amy Dunn from Gone Girl. She makes up a diary, but I don't know if that's the same thing as being an unreliable narrator.
No, I'd say that book was all about unreliable narrators. Both the main characters are.
Yeah, and it's all about the stories we can choose to tell as well, both consciously and unconsciously, I think.
Yeah, but this was like almost 200 years ago.
The unreliable narrator is a famous hallmark of any kind of Gothic fiction.
I did not know that was a hallmark of Gothic fiction, but then again, I haven't really read much Gothic fiction.
I have. I love Gothic fiction. It's got quite a lot of Gothic tropes in it.
Ooh, can you explain a bit more about which Gothic tropes it has in it? Because I'm interested.
So one is the theme of madness, which also comes up a lot in stories of the Gothic, and it's the idea of how much you can trust yourself, both because of the unreliable narrator thing, but also because of the theme of, are you in the right mind, or how can you tell what's the thin line between madness and sanity, darkness, just generally in that kind of haunted places.
I'm thinking Wuthering Heights now. I think I haven't read it, but I have seen the TV or some TV adaptation. That's probably one of the more famous Gothic stories, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, the suggestion of disease, for example, with the eye as well. Any kind of physical deformity is often very much linked with our ideas of monstrosity, and so our ideas of the Gothic. And it's also often very high emotion as well. For example, passion and killing someone because of passion. And the Gothic tropes are like darkness, isolation, madness, confusion over what's real, folklore diaries, letters to kind of fragment stories together, disease, superstition, dreams and nightmares, eroticism, various things like that.
Cool. Yeah, okay. So was Edgar Allan Poe one of the first popular Gothic writers?
Yeah, he's really famous for the Gothic. I think he was one of the ones who popularised it in American literature.
Yeah, he wasn't the first, but he popularised it. He popularised short stories in general, to be honest with you.
Oh, so without him, we would not even be having this podcast.
Possibly.
Well, I shall thank you, Edgar Allan Poe, then.
He's also credited, interestingly, when you think of Arthur Conan Doyle, he's also credited with inventing the detective fiction genre.
Interesting.
Yes, it's true. He wrote, I think, 3 stories that were like the first detective stories. Conan Doyle apparently said, each of Poe's detective stories is a route from which a whole literature has developed. Where was the detective story until Poe breathed the breath of life into it?
Oh, wow.
High praise.
Yeah. He popularised Gothic, short stories, and detective stories. This guy's like a writing superhero.
His work also influenced science fiction.
Oh my god.
I mean, it's what you get, isn't it, when the novel is only just invented in your time period. Everything you do is original.
Is this typical of a story? Like, it sounds like Edgar Allan Poe wrote loads of different short stories that were, I mean, I was just trying to work out the link between this and writing detective stories.
No, I don't know. I guess they're both about people dying and being found out.
Murder? I guess it's murder. It must be murder.
That'll do it. Having read more of Poe's stories, I think they do tend to follow these tropes that Simone was talking about. Being buried alive is a common one. I've noticed he likes to brick people up in walls, that kind of thing.
And it makes sense, doesn't it? It's the idea of, like, the house and haunted space and secrets beneath the surface.
I think none of them really held up quite as well to me because the Telltale Heart has such a strong voice, and that's not common in his work.
What do you think made the voice so strong? Was it the way it was written, like the rhythm, the sort of frantic rhythm of it? Because I noticed it used some, I guess, interesting sentence constructions.
Yes, in some sections it seems perfectly logical, and in others it's just so much repetition, exclamations where there doesn't need to be, and it's such a strange. There's kind of a weird mix of ideas in there as well. So it's the form of the actual writing mirrors the mess that's in this guy's brain, right? And the contradiction that he's trying to prove that he's sane when he's crazy. You see both of those things in the way that he words the story, not just in the events of it.
That makes sense.
And it is so distinctive. If there was another paragraph of prose written in this style, you would be able to say, yeah, this is the guy from the Telltale Heart.
It kind of mimics the heart rhythm, doesn't it?
In some places, yeah.
I didn't notice that, but that's a really cool detail.
Especially when it's repetition, when he's talking about his own heart beating, he's like, louder, 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 and you're like, hang on. It's quite smart.
It is. I liked that.
Let's talk a little bit more about Edgar Allan Poe as a person. He seems to be quite mysterious. As is often the case, we can't really tell how much of the things we read about him are actually true, because it's been a long time. I'm sure things have been exaggerated, mixed up. It's difficult to know. I think one of the most interesting things I found was that we don't really understand how he died.
I heard it was like lead poisoning or something, which is also why his face had the shape it did.
Yeah, I mean, this was a long time ago. This kind of stuff happened.
So would this be accidentally drinking it, or was it like a drug thing? Because it sounded like he had, when I had a quick cursory look, it sounded like he had some addictions to things.
Alcohol being a main one. Although it wasn't that he drank a lot of it, it was more that he couldn't handle it. Apparently it was documented that he'd be like staggering after a glass of wine.
I mean, this is what I read about his death. Apparently, he just showed up on a night in October in Baltimore wearing someone else's clothes and was delirious. And then they tried to take him to hospital and make him sane again, to put it lightly. Apparently, he kept saying the name Reynolds, and nobody knows why.
How very gothic.
Before he could become coherent, he died at 5 a.m, so we have no idea what happened to him.
It's like he became a character in one of his own stories.
I mean, if he'd survived, we could say, what happened? Why were you wearing someone else's clothes? And like, why were you so drunk or whatever it was? But we just don't know. I've adopted the stance that he was probably, the real Edgar Allan Poe was abducted by time travelers.
Makes sense. Next episode of Doctor Who.
So another interesting thing, he wrote this really long non-fiction piece about the origins of the universe. I don't know if you guys know this.
No?
I did not.
Called it Eureka.
Was it plausible?
It's remarkable. It seems like he just sat down and thought about it for a while and then thought, hang on a minute, I think I've figured it out. This was how the universe was created. And apparently that was just a thing that you did at the time. And people were like, yeah, I mean, if you just sit around and think really hard, you can figure out science.
Basically a philosophy degree. I can say it because I also studied philosophy.
What were his conclusions?
Right, well, it's very strange. Some of it is weirdly accurate. And he hints on some ideas about general relativity. He words some stuff that sounds a lot like space and time are linked, but he can't have meant that because this was way before Einstein. So that's disturbing.
Yeah, more proof he was abducted into the TARDIS.
Yeah, you never know. And then other ideas are that he worked religion into it, which just makes it weirder. I guess that was also normal at the time. He thinks everyone came from God and their souls were from God, and then they returned to God. And then this also apparently is linked to the fact that the universe is continuously expanding from a single point and then retracting. So he preempted the big crunch, which later became a theory. But he thought it would expand and then contract and it would keep going. And he's like, the heartbeat of the universe. Interesting idea.
Yeah, I like it.
Also, he got lots of things about how rotations of planets and Newtonian principles completely wrong.
Obviously.
Everyone at the time thought he was crazy. And he said that his work was an art and not a science, which is an interesting thing to say. But then he also seemed to really believe it was true.
I mean, you have to believe in your own art.
I mean, I suppose. But it's just contradictory in my modern brain that you would admit that it's not science, but it must be true.
I feel like a lot of people have that view on faith. Like, God isn't scientifically proven.
Yeah, that's true, but that's kind of different.
Is it?
I guess he was linking them together. Anyway, he said his contemporaries would never understand his genius, but I'm paraphrasing. That's basically how it read to me. That maybe in 2,000 years they would see that he was right all along.
Sounds like wishful thinking.
So in another 1,800 years, we can say he was definitely wrong. I mean, it's not looking good for him at the moment.
His time will come.
He sounds like a proper character. I think having a conversation with him would be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. He wasn't particularly popular. I mean, people liked his work, but I think because he wrote about Gothic things, they kind of wanted to think of him as kind of evil.
Heard he was a lot more popular in England than he was in America.
Yes, he was more popular in Europe.
Yeah, apparently he was like, when he got letters, he was like, what? What is this? Why are you giving me fan mail?
You just didn't understand the concept of fan mail.
No. Like, what do you mean you like my work? No one does this. Why are you trying to trick me?
Well, he was a critic, so he just wrote bad things about other people. So maybe he expected people to just write bad things about him as well.
Maybe.
He's credited as being the first, I think it was American writer to live off their writing. But apparently it was quite a struggle and he was very poor for most of his life.
Writing will do that for you as a hobby.
But I imagine trying to live off just writing even now is quite difficult.
Most writers make under 5,000 a year.
Yeah. It's hard to pay rent on that.
To cycle back to the story, you know, we were talking about how there isn't any link really on the relationship between the old man and the narrator, and it makes it all very ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
So there is one theory that it's a father-son relationship, and that the vulture eye of the old man is meant to symbolize parental surveillance, or like just general surveillance, and that the murder of the eye is then a removal of the conscience. How do we feel about this?
I mean, he calls him the old man, which in British slang can mean dad.
I like the sentiment, but it feels so much like reaching. When we get too far into theories, I start to question whether it's even worth anything.
So you don't think he deliberately planned the eye or the story to symbolise anything in particular?
I mean,
I was thinking about what the eye could mean, and I had no idea. I guess it's like he doesn't like the old man looking at him or her. The thing about the eye is what got me thinking it could be a woman. But then I was like, why am I thinking that? No, Mel, you're thinking of Laura Mulvey again, aren't you? Stop it.
Please elaborate.
Oh, the male gaze film theory. But it doesn't really apply here. But it's about how female characters were framed in the way a man would look at them in films.
That could be a very interesting reading.
I just like the literal interpretation that there's just something slightly off about this guy, and Edgar Allan Poe maybe picked the eye because, you know, eyes are a prominent and yet kind of gross part of people.
Eyes are creepy.
I think teeth are more creepy.
I mean, I have things about both of those. I always have nightmares my teeth will fall out, but I've got something like the eyes. Like, I can't bear to watch anything go near someone's eye.
Yeah.
I am somewhat immune, as I had to learn to touch my eyeball in order to put in contact lenses.
It's not as gross as you think.
It's not slimy, it just feels a bit warm.
You're not helping.
I'm sorry.
You're going to end up beneath someone's floorboards.
No.
You and your contacts.
So this is a really good story because it's gripping and interesting to read, yet we don't know anything about either of the characters.
I can imagine people sitting in cafes back in the day trying to figure it out just as we are.
Do you think it was written like that so it'd be a talking point?
I think it was written like that because madness was a cool trope. But then you can have someone mad and still give answers. So maybe.
Yeah, I'm hungry for answers.
I mean, I feel like when you have an unreliable narrator, you have to take their word for pretty much everything until proven otherwise. You just have to kind of have it in your back of your head that something might not be right. Because otherwise, why read the story?
It's true.
That's true.
So is there anything we would change about the story? if we wrote it.
Definitely not. I would add a meme ending just for a joke, and then share it to people who know the story.
You would ruin it.
And yeah, it would not be good. It would be bad, but that would be the point. It would be funny. You could add so much after that that would be completely wild and still make sense, because it is so open, like you said. I mean, people have it's an old story. People have messed with it. I haven't really looked into the various adaptations, but I'm sure people have done all kinds of things.
Yeah, I don't know what I would do to it. Because even if I said, oh, there should be something that is absolutely true, it wouldn't work because the narrator's clearly mad. So,
But was he mad the whole time, or was he just tormented by a guilty conscience?
I think you have to be pretty mad to dismember somebody in the bath.
I mean, if you're gonna dismember someone, the bath is actually a reasonable place to do
She's
it.
got you there. It's the point of the narrator. He was actually pretty sensible about the crazy things he did.
It's a fair point. He could just be very violently driven, but he does have a point that the way he does them is very thought out. We almost want to dismiss him as insane because that idea is more comfortable than the thought that someone would just commit premeditated murder for no apparent motivation that we understand.
Yeah, there's that phrase, there's a method to my madness. Feels very apt for this story.
You're right. But I really don't think you could reasonably change anything. It is so short. Everything's there for a reason. I mean, he often liked to speak on this idea of keeping stories simple, and he thought every story you could be able to read it in a single sitting. So he is really, like, it's focused, right? It doesn't mess around. I don't think you could, anything in the structure in it is particularly flexible. There's no space.
There's nothing extraneous about it. If you add or remove something, it'll change the story completely, I feel.
All right, that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. You can find all of our stories and our previous episodes on our website at theshortstoryworkshop.com. If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can do so via Twitter. I am at MattBWriter, Mel.
At Ficaholic.
And Simone.
At T_M_typewriter, also known as the modern typewriter.
Perfect. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back with another story next week. Goodbye.
Next episode of Doctor Who.
No, the next one's got Daleks in it. But if I had Edgar Allan Poe as well, I'd be very happy.
Edgar Allan Poe became a Dalek.
Oh my goodness. What a twist.
Nevermore. Nevermore. Anyway.